The rumbling shook Howard Ulrich from his fading half-sleep in the cabin of his single-masted sailing boat. Bolting up and looking out the window, his eyes widened as he saw the still waters of the Alaskan inlet churn and rise into a monstrous, debris-strewn wave, and the orange evening light sparkling off its breakers. With the wave easily 50 feet in height and heading straight towards their tiny craft, Howard immediately knew that he and his 8-year-old son on the next berth would be within its unyielding grasp within moments. He woke the boy by throwing a life preserver at him while instructing him, "Son, start praying." Welcome to this episode of History Nuggets. Today's episode takes place on a summer evening in 1958 and is entitled The Wave of Lituya Bay. 120 miles from the city of Juneau in the southeastern spur of Alaska, Lituya Bay cuts a fjord 7 miles long, but only 2 miles in width into the mountains and cliffs of the Fairweather mountain range, with steep and heavily forested walls to both sides. The still waters of the bay are largely protected from the ocean's turbulent waves by a shallow sill running northwest to southeast across the mouth, 2/3 of which rises above the water to form a tree-lined breakwater peninsula. The remaining third allows access around the right side with about 32 feet of depth to spare before deepening to the bay's overall depth of 720 feet. In the dead center of the bay lies Cenotaph Island, oval in shape and popular as a fishing escape, beyond which the inlet terminates at the perpendicular scar caused by the Fairweather Fault that runs down the spine of the mountain range. The result is 2 glacial side inlets that give Lituya Bay its distinctive T shape. Gilbert Inlet on the left and Crillon Inlet to the right are each capped by relatively fast-moving glaciers, as fast-moving as glaciers ever are anyway, each having shifted by roughly 5 nautical miles since they were first mapped in 1778. The glacier's speeds, combined with and aggravated by the steep walls and fault line, lead to a perpetual risk of rock slides along the bay. Furthermore, the 5 to 10 foot tidal waters increase in intensity as they squeeze through the narrow and shallow mouth like water through a hose nozzle, making for occasional large and fast waves. Sometimes the speed of these waves can measure as high as 12 knots, or nearly 14 miles per hour. Lituya Bay had been struck by 5 giant waves in its recorded history, in 1853, 1854, 1874, 1899, and most recently in 1936. By 10:15 p.m. on the night of the 9th of July, 1958, the Alaskan summer light was just fading behind the high, scattered clouds as 3 small fishing boats about 40 feet long each lay anchored in the bay. Howard and his son, named Howard Jr. on his birth certificate, but known simply as Sonny, had entered on board the fishing boat Edry at about 8 o'clock. They had fished and explored for a bit before anchoring at a cove on the southeastern shore, where Sonny had quickly faded into sleep. Bill and Vi Swanson had entered about 9 o'clock on their boat, the Badger, and gathered some glacial ice at Cenotaph Island before anchoring on the inside of the breakwater, where the water measured at about 25 feet in depth. There, they enjoyed dinner before changing into their nightwear and retiring to their berths for the evening. Another couple, Orville and Mickey Wagner, had just purchased their boat, the Sun Moore, only a few months earlier, and were anchored near the mouth of the bay. They were cheerful and familiar, greeting their friends the Swansons with a wave across the water upon meeting. Other than those 3 boats, the bay was deserted. A group of 8 or 10 mountain climbers had been camping on the beach near the breakwater earlier, but they had left about 2 hours prior. Shortly after 10 p.m., flock of kittiwake gulls suddenly took flight and darted away, briefly startling the Swansons from their rest by bombarding the badger with droppings. The earthquake that struck at 10:16 p.m. measured roughly 7.7 on the Richter scale and lasted for 3 to 4 minutes, which is an extraordinarily long time for an earthquake. It split the ground into fissures. The mountains bucked like ocean waves, causing the trees to dance and fall, and the wildlife to howl in panic. Bill Swanson bolted out of his bed and looked toward the head of the bay, 6 miles in the distance. Ordinarily, the steep walls concealed the inlets from sight from the front of the bay. But Bill beheld the earthquake's power as he watched it physically raise the glacier above the walls of the bay and into his line of sight.
The glacier had risen in the air and moved forward so it was in sight,
he later recalled.
It must have risen several hundred feet. I don't mean it was just hanging in the air. It seemed to be solid, but it was jumping and shaking like crazy.
Bill Swanson watched as a colossal piece of the sloping northeastern wall of Gilbert Inlet, measuring roughly a half-mile square and roughly 300 feet thick, cracked free from the mountain. He would later describe the block of rocks, gravel, ice, trees, stumps, dirt, and debris as a big load of rocks spilling out of a dump truck, as it plunged 3,000 feet into the waters of the bay, causing a deafening crash. Geologists now estimate the volume of the rock slide to be in the neighborhood of 40 million cubic yards, larger than that of 12,000 Olympic-sized swimming pools of dense, metamorphic rock. The force with which it impacted the waters of Gilbert Inlet was similar to one that would be created by an asteroid, creating a massive wave with enough power to generate a vacuum in its wake. The force of water and the air rushing to fill that vacuum essentially flung the water more than 1,700 feet up the opposing 45-degree slope, swiftly washing past the previous flood line and over the spur. The height of the wave was more than 8 times the maximum recorded height of any oceanic tsunami recorded by that time. Shocked out of bed aboard the Edry, Howard Ulrich made it to the window in time to see the water sloshing and splashing around the 2 inlets before pouring down the main body of the bay.
It was not a wave at first, it was like an explosion,
he explained.
The wave came out of the lower part and looked like the smallest part of the whole thing. The wave did not go up 1,800 feet. The water splashed there.
He watched as it rounded the corner of Gilbert Inlet and came into his view from the Edry, silhouetting the trees on Cenotaph Island and racing at more than 100 miles per hour toward the mouth of the bay. Howard figured that he had about 2 minutes' time before the wave reached him, his tiny boat, and his sleeping son, and it turned out he was about right. After throwing a life preserver over Sonny, Howard radioed the Badger and the Sunmore, warning his neighbors of the incoming wave. He saw that as the wave swarmed around Cenotaph Island, it rose to about 100 feet in height, breaking on the opposite north side of the island but remaining smooth and rounded on the south, where he was. He made a split-second decision to turn his little boat toward the wave and open the engine up to full speed in an attempt to ride over it. Howard also cranked the shipboard winch to reel in the 64-pound anchor, but the mechanism stuck and refused to move. Running out of options, he instead released the jammed anchor chain to its maximum length of 210 feet, then tried maneuvering the Edry to face the wave, while again radioing the other boats.
Mayday, Mayday, this is the Edry in Lituya Bay. All hell has busted loose in here. I think we've had it. Goodbye.
About a minute later, the smooth and rounded leading edge of the wave, by then measuring between 50 and 75 feet in height, picked up the Edry, snapping the anchor chain, in Howard's words, like a string. Father and son held on as best they could as their boat was lifted into the air by the force of the water. Howard's hopes of piloting the craft over the crest of the wave vanished as he realized that the wave was carrying the boat far inland. Looking down, he could see the tops of trees beneath the hull of the Edry, and he was convinced that they were about to crash horribly. As the wave roared past, however, it unexpectedly pulled the tiny boat back out from above the trees, depositing it back into the churning and clogged but level waters of Lituya Bay, with Howard and Sonny shaken but not hurt. Meanwhile, the breaking northern side of the wave grabbed the Badger, snapping its anchor chain as effortlessly as it had the Edry's. The water rocketed the Badger, with Bill and Vi clinging inside like a surfboard high into the air, clearing the breakwater's trees before crashing into the ocean with tremendous force. Uprooted trees then showered down on the Badger like a rain of javelins, one smashing through the windows and spearing Bill in the chest. The force of the branches slammed him against the bulkhead before the turbulence sucked the tree back out as quickly as it had arrived. Immediately, the Badger took on water and began to founder. Bill and Vi, still in their night clothes and with Bill bleeding heavily, climbed aboard their 8-foot skiff and cast themselves into the filthy, churning water. The last anyone saw of the Sunmore, it was heading at top speed toward the entrance to the bay. The wave swept over the boat, washing it and the Wagners from sight. Howard and Sonny managed to pilot the Edry back from their cove to the entrance of the bay. 20-foot waves still rocked the waters, with splintered trees and chunks of glacial ice the size of automobiles threatening to damage or sink the little boat. Farther up the shore, Howard's radio partner and fishing neighbor, Stutz Graham, had felt the earthquake and seen the wave from aboard his own boat, the Lumen. Radioing Howard, he asked if his help was needed.
"No, for Christ's sake, don't come in here,"
came Howard's response.
"Stay out."
After about a half hour, the water became relatively calm, and the Edry limped out into the ocean at about 11 p.m. The sun was by then setting into the shortened Alaska night, and the surface of the water was almost completely coated by splintered and shattered branches and limbs and floating blocks of ice. Neither Howard nor Stutz knew what had become of the Badger or the Sunmore. For the next 2 hours, they each took their boats out to make several trips through the hazardous waters, sweeping the surface with their spotlights in a search for their missing neighbors. Neither of the men saw anything but debris among the dark, congested water. Out in the ocean, the skiff remained afloat, though nearly invisible among the field of floating rubble. Bill was awake but fading fast. The bleeding from the tree strike was manageable, but the pain from his 4 broken ribs was taking its toll. Vi, overcome by the shock, had passed out, and the skiff had started to take on water. Bill clung to consciousness for as long as he could. With Howard and Sonny resting, Stutz decided to make one last run. He piloted the Lumen back out into the water and was just about to give up when he heard a faint cry in the darkness. Cutting the engine, he passed the beam from his searchlight across the wreckage, straining his eyes for any sign of life. Stutz's searchlight returned nothing, but as fate would have it, Bill and Vi's tiny boat drifted into a straight visual line of the Lumen, silhouetting their shapes against a faint light from the shore. Stutz gathered up the weakened couple aboard the Lumen and made haste for the shore. The search for Orville and Mickey Wagner continued until morning light, to no avail. The only evidence of their existence found was a small oil slick where the Sunmore had gone under. Rocks continued to fall from the fresh scar on Gilbert Inlet for a full day. After 3 weeks, plane travel was once again safe for the area, after which geologists began to study the area anew, as a wave had washed away all evidence of any of the previous waves. The earthquake had permanently shifted the landscape of Lituya Bay, moving parts of the mountain range by 3 feet vertically and forward by as much as 21. A cabin on Cenotaph Island and a lighthouse on the breakwater vanished completely beneath the wave. The sheer power of the wave had removed any sign of their having ever been there, including the concrete foundations on which they had once sat. Howard and Sonny continued to fish, although Howard soon retired from doing so for a living. Bill and Vi made full recoveries, though Vi never again returned to the boating life. Today, the effects of the 1958 rockfall and wave are still visible on the shores of Lituya Bay. A visible scar mars the northern shore of Gilbert Inlet, and the coastal line between old growth and relatively young trees and underbrush forever remind observers of the power of nature on display on that serene summer night in Lituya Bay. Thank you kindly for tuning in. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel for more stories just like this one in the future. Have a beautiful day, and we wish you all peace and knowledge.